This is Greg from grouplessons.com with Daniel from growyourmusicstudio.com. And we are going to talk about two really, really important strategies for time management in the assessment room. Daniel has had years of experience teaching group lessons. He did a more low-tech, he did it without software. He was a one-man army, and he really came up with some inspiring and amazing strategies for time management. And I think that even though Piano Express has a tool to help manage time, the software tool, nothing replaces the human element to success. And the more we can train our TAs to manage time, the better everything is going to flow. And I think, Daniel, your ideas with our software will be an unstoppable force. And I will say that this video should be watched by any teacher assistant that our licensees are going to train. So anyone who's going to be working in the assessment room. So if the teacher is doing it all, if it's a one-room model, then this is for the teacher. But if it's a two-room model, then this is really for the teacher and for the TA. So Daniel, I've heard a lot of your ideas, and I was really just impressed with two things. And the first one I want to talk about is teaching to the hands and not to the head. I want you to tell everyone what that means and why it is a strategy that you stuck to in your group lessons.
Yeah. What it is a lifesaver when it comes to using the time as efficiently as possible when you are evaluating or assessing a child. That's kind of the cute answer. How does it actually work in practicality? I'm going to tell a brief story here. When I was a new teacher, my first couple years of teaching, I had an example to follow from what I had learned in observing other teachers that I had watched, private lesson teachers in the internship that I did. I had my own memories of how my teachers taught me. I had 4 different teachers growing up. And the thought of a teacher is someone who kind of takes this information that is outside the learner and cracks open their skull and just starts pounding that information in. Like, here's a bunch of stuff that you need to know. Now, when that comes to private lessons, the way that worked kind of worked like this. And again, going back to those first couple years, we would get to the first major concept after the kids kind of learned the keyboard geography. And one of those first concepts, in almost every method, but certainly in the method that I was using at the time, was the quarter note. And so here's a quarter note on the page. So what did first year, second year, third year Daniel, how did Daniel approach teaching the child that quarter note? Well, it would look something like this. We'd start by having the child say what it is. And we would get out the whiteboard, we'd draw some quarter notes. I would explain what rhythm was. I would explain what a steady beat was. And we would do some clapping. And after about 3 or 4 minutes of this, we would then look at the song on the next page and say, okay, now let's play these quarter notes. And then the child would just kind of look up at me like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Because in all of that, there was no instruction on how to actually do it. Now, of course, what did I do then? Well, then I started explaining how to play the song. And so without... I wanted the child to understand the music. And so I did this without any sort of demonstration because I didn't want them to hear it so that they could fake it, you know? What is all this pointing to? It is this idea that learning is putting abstract concepts into the child's mind or in the student's mind. Now, I might be over-exaggerating a little bit, and I'm not going to pretend that this is how every teacher in the world thinks. And in reality, even at that point in time, I did know this was a physical skill that the child was trying to learn. But I didn't realize just how easy teaching could be if I would drop that abstract stuff. Because what I was doing a decade later from that was, here's how it worked. I would turn the page, we would get to the quarter note page, and I would look at that quarter note and I'd say, have you ever seen one of these before? Remember, I'm in a group environment. There's 5 kids around me. I've got to teach this kid how to play this song on the very next page as fast as possible for the purpose of not spending 5 or 10 minutes with a child while every other person in the room is kind of looking at me like, hey, I need help here. So I'd say, have you ever seen one of these before? Most of the kids said yes. They'd seen one before. Do you know what it's called? Most of the kids said no, because even if they didn't know, if they had seen it before, they probably didn't know what that was. And all I said was, that's actually a picture of a sound. That's what a sound looks like. Huh? Let me just show you. Do you see how there's 4 of those right here? Yeah. Watch this. Do you see this? See this finger? Finger 2, remember? Watch. I'm going to play those. Bop, 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 bop. Can you do this? And they'd say, of course I can do it. Maybe they wouldn't say that. Maybe they would just do it. And they would do it. Doot, 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 doot. Cool.
4 sounds.
Now, yeah, 4 sounds. Now, over here, we have a song. Now, do you see how these 2 are clustered together? It was a finger 2 and 3 note cluster. And it went bum, 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 bum. Yep.
I know what book you were using.
Yep, you sure do. It was the favorite primer level.
There we
Old
go.
Clock. Yep.
Good.
Okay.
Good book.
And so I love that book. And so I would play it for them, and I'd say, do you see how this points up? That means this hand does it. See how that points down? This hand does it. What I was doing was only giving them the information they needed to actually be able to play that song. Now, after many years of trial and error, I figured out what that actually was. So there was a period of time where I went from those abstractions and explaining quarter notes and drawing things and showing flashcards to just, hey, when you see those 2 together, you just push those keys down. And I could get a child to play that really quickly when I dropped all the abstractions, all the theory. Now, I have something else I want to say, but it sounded like you had a question for me, Greg.
Oh, I was going to say, it sounds like sculpting. It's like the art of subtracting. It's like you have this big hunk of everything you could say, but you chisel it down to what you really need to say, and then it's beautiful.
Yes. So this is all well and good, and it could be inspiring to hear this. I don't know. It's not going to be all that helpful if I don't make this a little more practical. Otherwise, I'm going to be guilty of the thing that I said just a couple minutes ago that I don't want to be guilty of. So what should someone do who's actually working with a child? You have to think more physically than intellectually. You have to think, okay, I want to make this thing happen. I want the child to do this particular thing. What do I have to say? Keeping in mind, especially young children are far more literal than adults.
Yes.
Very literal. And there's brain developments that happen at age 7 that kind of separates 7 and under from 7 and over. And after 7, the children get to be a little more logical and rational, but especially for 7 and under, and even sometimes up to 8, depending on the developmental progress of the child, you've got to be careful. So I just got used to talking very physically. Yeah. You need to describe exactly what the child's hand needs to do, and you can't use a lot of loaded words like rhythm or steady beat. You just have to demonstrate it. Anybody who's teaching students, especially elementary age students, you need to think very carefully about the words that you're using and be very directive in the comments, and think about the minimum number of words that you need to use to get them to do the action that you want them to do.
I'm going to push back and just ask a question that I know a lot of teachers are asking, because you said to use as few intellectual words as possible. Mm-hmm. And so how is any student going to learn theory? Because I mean, I'll say theory is my passion. I am a music theory nerd. I want my students to be, just as strong in their understanding of the why behind the what. So are you just saying we skip it?
Okay, that's a good question. And I would say that, and this might rustle a few jimmies, rustle a few feathers, but there were times that I would go that whole lesson and I wouldn't really mention that it was a quarter note. There were times that I explained physically how to do the action to the student, but never backfilled it with a theory until a lesson or two later,
Right.
when I could see that they actually could do it. Because it is a physical skill that we're trying to have them learn. If they just want to learn theory, they could go to a more intellectual class and just learn the theory concepts. But I'm trying to get them to play.
Right.
And so, and there are some really smart researchers. When I was first experimenting with all this stuff, I myself didn't start with theory and then move to practicality. I started with practicality, what worked in the moment, what saved time, what seemed to get the best result in the fewest number of words with the student. And then later I went and was thinking, how is this working? And I found theories later that showed why what I was already doing was working. One of them was by a researcher named Hermann Ebbinghaus, and he had some information that was really interesting to me. That he did some tests, and oh man, it's been like a decade, so I'm going to botch this really bad. But he did some tests that showed that if you taught an abstraction and first, and then had them use it later, it wasn't as effective as teaching a practical thing and then backfilling it later with the abstract or theoretical concept.
Yeah.
That the retention was so much better when they did first and then learned second, versus what almost everybody does. They turn the page, the new concept is there on the very first page of the unit, and now we're talking at a 7-year-old. It just doesn't work. And frankly, it takes a lot of time, which I didn't have in the way that I was teaching group. Now, as you mentioned at the outset, it's a lot easier because of the tech tools that kind of accompany the Piano Express curriculum and method. I didn't have that, in the late 2000s when I was first kind of pioneering this way that I was doing multi-level groups. So I had to be very judicious with my sense of time, and what that meant was over time I got better and better and better at talking to the kids' hands, and obviously I was talking to the child, but I was telling them what to do with their hands. One other thing that I wanted to mention earlier that we didn't get to, and that is this: that I rarely talked about rhythm and steady beat. It is the height. It is a fool's errand to try to explain to a 7-year-old what a steady beat is, in my opinion. Now, you're going to be successful with some of them, but you're going to be... Maybe this is just showing what a bad teacher I am, but you're probably going to have a lot more hair pulling than not. And so what I found was, if I could get their hands to do what I needed them to do and explain where their hands go and how to... If I could just demonstrate the steady rhythm, that they would get it pretty quickly. And I will tell you, usually by the second book, I never had to have children count. Even when they got the eighth notes, my teacher growing up, and in the early years of my teaching, I had kids counting 1 and 2, and like every child mandated. If they didn't say it out loud, I got on their case. By the time that I was 5 years into my group system, I rarely had children counting out loud, and I rarely had eighth note problems, because I would inculcate that sense of rhythm without trying to explain it to them. And again, I think what I've seen with a lot of teachers, and what has been told to me by a lot of teachers, is that the child isn't steady. Metronome time, counting out loud time, lecture time about what a steady beat is, riding the child until they get the steady beat, versus just, hey, do it this way. No, that isn't it. Listen again. And, earlier in another video, I talked about classroom control, and I talked about how I would, if a child wouldn't do something that I was saying in terms of behavior management, I would just keep saying the same thing over and over again until they did. I would do something similar in the teaching as well with the rhythm. If they didn't get it, there was no emotion, there was no counting. I would just demonstrate it. And if they continue to struggle with it, I would just knock down the selection size, the amount that they were trying to get, until it was the smallest piece that they could get correctly by mimicking me. And they learned steady rhythm almost by rote, even though I wasn't a rote teacher.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I've heard I've heard you teach and explain some of these things before, and I've had in my own creative mind, I've had the image of an interstate where for some reason there's just blocked traffic one way and you're cruising the other. I've seen this before where you're just going 65 and you look at the other side, you're like, oh, I'm glad I'm not on that side of the, if I was going south instead of north, it'd be like 1 mile an hour instead of 65. And I think that there is this 65 mile an hour full speed ahead road to theory if you go hands to head. And there's just such a risk of traffic jam if you go head to hands. The other thing I want you to unpack a little bit is your idea of not teaching pieces, but teaching processes. And tell me what that means and what that looks like.
Sure. So for me, this was just my personal philosophy, but so this, and I say that because this could be a little bit controversial. I think I've gotten some pushback on this. I saw the metric of success in my studio as number of pieces passed per week. Now, the pushback I've gotten is that, well, that isn't the sole metric of success in music. In fact, success is antithetical to music. It's art. So yes, true, granted. But there's a lot that I'm leaving unsaid in saying that, so I think people are reacting more to a ghost of what I think than actually what I think.
Okay, let me just jump in. Maybe you got pushback from teachers, but I'm betting that you never got pushback from parents, because parents would agree with you on that point.
That's so true. Okay. In fact, it's one of the few, other than a number of times my child complained this week about music, that was probably the other metric that the parent was... One's a positive metric. Oh, look how many songs they're passing. And look how little the child is complaining. I love this. It's great. So they love my studio.
There you go.
So since that's how I measured it, I thought, well, this is going to be a long career. This career is going to feel really long. The days are going to feel really long if I'm the only one who cares about this. And if I'm the only one who's working towards that goal. So I needed the child to work with me, not against me. But that meant I had to work with the child. Now, if you have children, that can be a little challenging sometimes because they have capability issues. They're young humans. They're not fully developed yet. So what I needed to do was break down the process of learning a song for a child so that they could do it on their own without me being there. Yes. And what that looked like was having a bank of phrases that I used over and over and over again. And if they ran into the same problem, see, this is if I ran into the same problem, I did not try to explain it a different way. I think as teachers, we teach the same music out of the same books year after year after year. And so to make it interesting for ourselves, I think sometimes we get creative. It's far more helpful for a child to find a phrase that you see works with like 99.8% of the children who come through the door of your studio and just use that over and over again. And so for me, for a long time, I did experiment until I found something that just worked like magic. And then I would just use that phrase over and over again. And so, don't teach pieces, teach a process. From the very beginning, I again would kind of get into that character, and I would say with a similar cadence, similar tone of voice, same words, where do your hands go? What's that number right there pointing to the page? Okay, can you show me that on your hand? Oh, perfect. How many black keys do you see? 2. Great. Can you put your hands on 2 black keys? They put the hands on 2 black keys. Can you push down your 2? They push down the 2. You know how to play this song. Let's look at these numbers. Can you say the numbers? 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 2. Perfect. Okay, can you play that? All you got to do is push down those numbers. Yes, I watched them. You did it. Great. Maybe the rhythm was a little bit off. Maybe we work on that. But more than likely, I'm going to say to them, right now, play that on your own. I'm going to go talk to this person over here. When you feel like it's really good, put your card up. And so there was this kind of whole cadence, and every song at the beginning would be like that until about page 17 of Faber, where I would just kind of very gently hand it off to them. Okay, do you think you can get this on your own? Look, it's all the same numbers. It's the same thing. Just try it. I'm walking away. I would literally sometimes say that. I'm walking away. And I'd walk away, and they would be working on it. And sometimes I'd stay there and just to see if they got it right. Oh, you're getting this. You didn't even need me. You don't even need me anymore. You can do this all on your own. 7-year-old is getting it. So I know that's a little bit more practical, but I think that's actually helpful if you're kind of embarking on teaching group for the first time and you do need to be a little bit more efficient with your time use. But it really just came down to predictable, repeatable phrases that I used all the time. Where do the hands go? They look at the hand chart. Which hand plays first? Asking that question. Which is the first? What's the first number? Can you press down that first number? That is the way I would start every single song for that entire first book. And they would just get into that. And then the beautiful thing is, because they had more time with me, if there was ever any struggle, I was there and could correct that. And so what they were learning was not that piece of music, but the way that they learn music. That was really what my goal was in the first book. I did not care about the song. I care that they could get the process, because now I have a coactive participant that's actually going to be working with me for the next 5 years of their career, because they would stay with me for that long, and they would know how to do it. And so, and I'm going to cap with this, I had observation videos of group lessons that I taught. Yeah. And when I was training other teachers in the way that I taught group, I would sometimes get criticism from new teachers, because they would see an observation where I had a mixed class with maybe a few more beginner students and then some older students that were like past the halfway point, or maybe even past the 75% mark of the method book. They were like 5, 6, 7 books in. And I wouldn't really interact with them that much during this whole hour. And I would get emails from people who were watching these observation videos of me teaching, like, you're like ignoring those older kids. I was like, you know why? Because they don't want me there. They're working. If I come over, they like get this annoyed look on their face, like, why are you bothering me? And I was like, because they so know what they're doing, and I so trust them to get their notes and rhythms correct that I don't pester them, and they just deliver song after song after song beautifully played for me. So why in the world would I interrupt that process? Because I have trained this self-contained unit. There's a system at work within the child that doesn't require my input or energy, and it's just working beautifully. I'm not going to throw a cog into that machine.
Yeah. I think that it's so important for teachers to understand that the better they do their job, the more they are day by day working themselves out of a job with that child. It's like a construction worker. They're building a house, but the better they build that house, the more they are working themselves out of the job of building that house, because the house will be built. And I think with students, and I really, one of my takeaways from hearing you talk about this point is you are breeding needy students if you helicopter parent and you're like, oh, do you need anything? Let me meet all your needs, and really not giving the child the onus to think for themselves. And in a group lesson, if you start breeding needy students, then you are cornering yourself very quickly. And so what you have to do is breed students that can think independently, and that is something that the teacher builds. I think that is one of the most important things you can build into a student. I mean, I tell all my students, I hope you're still playing the piano in 20 years, but I hope you're not calling me for advice. Good. So my question to this end, what exactly are the processes that a student needs to be independent? Is it understanding how to find a hand position? Is it understanding the logic of lines and spaces? What exactly would you say are, let's say, a child that's in their first book or two, someone who's just starting out? Yep. What are the absolute crucial things that a child needs to learn to do independently in order for them to get on this track of understanding processes rather than you spoon feeding them every note of every piece.
Yeah. I'm sure we all have the experience of having to write like a research paper or write something for school. What's the hardest part of that process? It's writing the first word. Yeah, well,
yeah.
the inertia of having to overcome that. Yeah, the inertia of having to overcome those first, the fear of, well, what do I do next? It almost paralyzes people. It paralyzes adults. It can paralyze a child. So for me, and I kind of gave this process just a second ago. Which hand do you see here? How many black keys do you see? So I pointed the little hand chart. Okay. And I'd point at the beginning of the song. What number do you see here first? 2. Okay. Can you put your hand on the 2 black keys? Yes. Can you push your 2 down? Yes. Great. That's the first note of the song. What's the next number? 3. Can you play 3? Or can you push down 3? They push down 3. Great. What's the next number? 2. Just walking them through that. Again, the physical action they need to perform. I am training them how to think.
Yeah.
So if they know the process to get started, and then I take them through that process, again, this is important. If you don't remember anything from this video, only remember this. You must say it the same way every time. Because then the child begins to say it to themselves. Yeah. And you don't see the result. You don't see the effect immediately. You see it 2 months down the line after you've done this for so long, and they don't even need you anymore that early. This is one of the things that was almost too good to be true that people thought I was making up, so that I actually had to release footage of me teaching a student how to sight read in 2 lessons. And I did this maybe like 5 years ago and just started showing it over and over again, where literally someone would see me take a child who'd never played piano before, come in, and they watched the first full hour they were with me in a group, and then the second full hour they were with me in a group. And by the end of that second full hour, I was literally just turning the page for this 8, I think he was 8, turning the page. Okay, find your hand position. Perfect. Can you get that first line? Okay, I'm out. Show me when you got it. I walk away, and they can see his hands. They see him figuring it out. See him thinking. See him looking around, maybe getting distracted every once in a while. And then he puts his card up for me to come back. I come back over. He's playing it. The rhythm's good.
Yeah.
So that's what you got to do. You have to train them how to think. You have to give them, that's what that process is. And then what's interesting is that no matter how hard the music gets, especially for the first, like, let's say 4 levels of your average beginner method, it's really the same process. There isn't really a lot to add to it. Sure, you add some maybe rhythmic complexity with 8th notes. Maybe you add dynamics and crescendo and diminuendo, phrasing. But the process of getting started is huge for those kids. And then if they can sight read and they have a chance to practice with you and get the music right with you and have access to that high quality feedback either through the teacher or through a tech tool like the Express app, then they begin to see like, oh, I'm getting this. Confidence grows, and then they get this little furnace of passion building within them for doing this, and it becomes a game for them.
Yeah. All right. I have one more question, and this is probably a question that a lot of teachers ask, and you've probably heard this before. If your goal is to get students to not need you, then why do they need you? What do they need you for if they don't need you?
What they need me for is, okay, I'm going to back up. Because what most teachers feel needed for is correcting note and rhythmic mistakes. Mm-hmm. Oh, I got to fix the music. Yeah. And so it's a lifetime of fixing notes and rhythms. Yes. My students need me for, at that point, for getting deeper and deeper into feeling, artistry, expression. So if I can just trust them to get the base level of aptitude for any given song, that I know that they're going to be showing up, or after I let them go for a couple minutes, I'm going to get basically a technically flawless performance, albeit dull and unimaginative, I've got a blank canvas on which I can start to paint with that child. And I can actually start teaching them how to have style. I can start teaching them how to interpret. It was so fascinating to me that even though I'd be working with a child for a while, like, they'd be banging out the notes and rhythms at forte to fortissimo, and getting it all technically perfect. And I'm just like, ugh, I wouldn't do that in front of them, and say, okay, now I want you to listen to how this could sound. So, they've already played, let's say, the first line of this, let's say, level 4 song of a beginner method. And then this is how you played it. Bang, 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 bang. And I play it for them. Now listen to how it could sound if you follow the phrasing, these sorts of things. And all of a sudden, I touch the keys differently. My tone improves because I had a really harsh tone when I was imitating what they had just done. And now I'm playing with some feeling. Now here's the thing. How easy is it for a child to change their touch if they're still struggling to stay steady over the bar, if they're still struggling to get the notes? They can't change their touch.
Forget it.
They can't.
Yeah.
I have seen children literally go from banging in one performance, me demonstrating, to them the next performance being like 80 to 90% of the way there, because the technical foundational skills are so good that they can literally touch. All they had to do was hear it differently, and they could actually mimic that. Insane and so satisfying to hear this kid that you really like, that is a hard worker and you're really enjoying listening to, like, just all of a sudden go from this song that's supposed to feel delicate and soft, and they're banging it out, to suddenly becoming delicate and soft, and they do it that quickly. That's just, there's very few feelings as a teacher as good as that.
So I want to close with just saying this, and maybe you've never thought of this before, but I can see this. What you're really asking teachers to do is to trade the reason why they're needed for to level that up. To say, instead of me being needed on this bottom shelf to just correct mistakes, to clean and scrub like a hygienist at a dentist's office, just scrape. Let me clean all the gunk. What then the child needs the teacher for is for inspiration, for holding a high standard, for meeting regularly with that teacher, and so the teacher can continue to cheer and inspire and coach.